Get ready for a special episode of your new favorite talk show. All right, so thank you guys for tuning in. This is your new favorite talk show. Technically, it's episode 2. It is the live version of my show. I am very, very excited to be here, and I'm going to add in Eli right now. Yeah, it was easier than I thought it was going to be. We love to see it. All right, Eli is connecting. There we go. I'm so glad you sent me the request because I was like, I actually don't know how to invite people to the live, so that would have been really embarrassing. So for everybody who's tuning in, welcome to your new favorite talk show, episode 2. We are going live this episode just because I felt that, one, it's easier for me to go back and edit from a live Instagram live. I can literally just upload this and it's super easy. But I just felt that with everything going on, that conversations need to be urgent, they need to be important, and they need to be done in a way that's super accessible to as many people as possible. So I know that with everybody being at home, Instagram, we're all on it. It's easy to access, and then I can upload it later to YouTube. But I'm super excited to have Eli with us today. So I guess I'll kind of start with an overview. I don't even know how to call it an overview, a summary. I don't know how you really want to just how
I do want to say I'm going to be referencing notes because I
love it. You are super prepared with notes.
Typed I was last night and was like, these are all the things I want to hit because there's so much stuff that I don't want to miss something in this, especially when it's live.
Because the way my brain has not been processing well, so I've been I was doing it in my head, you know what I mean? I was I'm talking to myself and being like, all right, Ayla, now be Eli and answer the question. That's how I have to process. So I'm glad you took notes. I know we talked about a couple things in our pre-conversations, which will be helpful. Because once I say something, then it's easy for me to go back and remember that I said it.
Right.
But so I guess let's start with where we are. Currently, we are our nation is in the midst of a series of protests and rebellions and uprisings in response to, specifically in the response to the murder of George Floyd, but we also want to recognize the murders of Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade. I know there was a man who was murdered last night by the police in Louisville, and I cannot remember his name at this moment. But just sort of in large response to the murders of unarmed Black people at the hands of cops specifically, and also at the hands of white vigilantes. And so there's just a lot of protest and uprising, and there's people have different responses to protests. People have very different responses to what's going on. Some people are saying that the only way to protest is to be peaceful. We've seen instances of, violence in the protest. We've seen where that may or may not be a part of the movement and all of those things. But I think that it's really important to talk about what allyship means in a space where you are not centered. Right. And so for the purposes of this conversation, I'm specifically focusing on non-Black folks who want to call themselves allies to the Black Lives Matter movement or to my Black existence in general. But some of these lessons also can be applied to other places. In the instance of Tony McDade, right? I, as a Black person, can understand what murder and police brutality means for my general existence. I can't begin to speak for what that means as a trans person. And so it's how am I as Galen being an ally to the trans community in all of those spaces. But I wanted to kind of start with that conversation. I have invited Eli on because Eli was very active and involved with the Not Again SU protest, as was I. And Eli was is somebody who I consider to be an ally. Jesus, Lord have mercy. Eli is someone I consider to be an Eli. Is someone I consider to be an ally in the most active sense of that word, physically putting themselves into space in order to advocate for the safety of Black protesters. And so I think that for me, I wanted to have somebody that I felt that in my heart, I felt like was an ally and also was able to talk to being an ally in so many different spaces and what that means. So I'm super grateful for having you on the show. Thank you so much for responding to my DM and
no
being
problem.
part of my Cuckoo Bananas
It's
idea.
I'm really thankful that you invited me on. I do want to say when you're talking about intersectionality, I do want to say my experience as a white protester can't be separated from me from my experience as a trans protester and a disabled protester, right? So like
Right.
when I talk about direct action stuff, like when we get to like people putting themselves in spaces, like those intersections also matter. Even when you're not centered, like trans women cannot get arrested for, you know, like it just can't happen. So like those intersections are also something that I'm keeping in mind, and that like I think are like my perspective comes from those places, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that. I actually had just we can actually jump in there because I'd seen the post and wanted to talk about it with you, but I had seen a post on Twitter that I didn't think about. Part of it is like it's not my experience, so I didn't have the thing to think about it. But it was the idea, you kind of got into it, that if a trans woman is arrested, they are more likely to be detained and held with like men. And that's really bothersome for so many reasons. Just the idea of like, one, we're ignoring people's gender experiences and gender identities, but two, like that places them in the way of so much harm. So I wanted to talk about, like you just said, sort of your experience as a trans protester who is an ally, but also the erasure that we're seeing in a lot of cases of the trans victims of police brutality.
Yeah, I'm simply not hearing enough chants and posts and all of it about Nina Pop and Tony McDade right now. And like that, it for me, sorry, it needs to come to the forefront. Okay? Yeah. I mean, I will mention this. My rib is like broken. And we'll talk about like how that happened later when we talk about direct action. But like, that's why I'm a little coffee and not, you know, breathing well. But yeah, like I think it's important that we highlight those specifically because those intersections are where like even higher rates of police brutality and murder, in anti-Black murder in general, occur. But yeah, it is an incredibly dangerous situation for trans people, specifically trans feminine people, to be arrested. And unfortunately, the hard part about that is that queer people, specifically trans people, are the people that are most likely to like want to get on the front lines as white people, because we also hate the cops. Like it's in our history to riot and to hate we want to get out there, but it is more dangerous for us. And so what I feel like is our role right now is to be there when we can, like, and put ourselves out there, and also spend our time radicalizing people who have more privileged bodies than us, right? Like white, cis, able-bodied people, go get arrested, please. Join Cole Sprouse, join Timothée Chalamet, go get yourself arrested. It's that simple. And like, I'm really encouraging people to think about, because even if you get detained, you're not going to get held, and you're not in danger when you get detained.
Right. And I think even within that, like we saw Cole Sprouse made a really very clear post about not making this a narrative about him and making it a narrative about white allyship. And then of course it becomes a celebrity narrative about him going to get arrested.
Right.
Which I think, right, like you're saying, it's using your privilege. So of course we want people to go out. We want people, and of course we're going to get beyond the protest, but I think this is important, of like, we want people with privilege to go out and be on the front lines and protest. But we also want to make sure that conversation still stays centered to what the issue is. And the issue is that the reason that we need white people, white cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied people to go out and protest is because without them, we know what would happen. We would probably,
and that's why the protests are happening in the first place.
Right. It's like the protests are happening because of what happens if white people aren't there. Like I saw this video, I retweeted it, and it was a young 15, 16, probably, Black boy who was kneeling in front of a line of police officers, and then a white girl, probably the same age,
she looked younger. She looked tiny.
And it pissed me off, because I'm just sitting here, I'm like, I love this because that is what allyship is, right? Like, it is literally putting your direct body, if you have privilege, in the front of somebody who doesn't have it, in order to in a sense, weaponize your privilege. Like, you know, the police are not going to come beat you up as a young cisgendered, in that case, white girl. I don't know that she's heterosexual, but a white girl.
Yeah.
And the fact that, and it pisses me off because as much as that is the right action for her to have taken, it was not, I'm upset that a girl, that children under the age of 18 are having to do that and are having to step in and put their bodies in front of police because the police don't care. We've seen it. You alerted me to in Seattle where a young girl was maced.
She's 10 years old.
10?
She's 10 years old, and
10.
she got maced in the face by a police officer. The Seattle protests were incredibly violent, and I want to call a specific attention to the Seattle protest and the Portland protests and the Eugene protests, because I think people think of this coast as very like leftist and liberal, and what I want to say is Eugene, Oregon, and Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, and also Bellevue, Washington, where protests are also getting violent. Those cities are a representation of the white liberal, the white moderate that MLK warned us about. Like, they are that. They are dangerous, and their police forces are weaponized. And so, like, if you think you're gonna go out, like, if you think like racism doesn't happen here, watch the videos. I watched a crowd of people behind a barricade get tear gassed on Capitol Hill in Seattle yesterday. There's a video of police starting that riot on Capitol Hill, the gay neighborhood, first of all, on the first day of Pride.
On the first day of Pride.
They tear gassed an entire crowd, making them run through the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I just want to offer that to people and say, like, it's in the same way it's not enough for you to say I'm not racist. It's not enough for you to say my city is not racist. Because if this is showing you anything, your city is racist.
Even if your
police force is racist,
your city might be. And in most cases probably is. Yes. Because even in cities we know with majority Black populations or majority Black and other folks of color populations, the systems that support the city are racist, even if the people are not. And that's,
for example, Atlanta right now. Ooh,
blue, blue, ooh, blue. Don't mind me and Eli. We a little extra sometimes, but you know, Atlanta has been. I've been reading a lot about the Atlanta protest. I was very happy to see that the young Morehouse man and the young Spelman woman were released and their charges were dropped. But I was really upset to just see that whole video play out. For people who don't know, a young Morehouse student and a young Spelman student were surrounded in a car by, like, I would almost argue 15 police officers, but it ended up being at the end. And they were like tear gassed. The window was broken. They were dragged out of the car and then just were not to be heard from for like almost 24 hours. And they have been released since, and they made a statement. I saw the young man make a statement yesterday, and I couldn't finish it because it was just really clear that he had experienced a level of trauma that he hadn't processed yet, probably doesn't even know where to begin processing it, and was just so... I think there's something that I'm seeing in these protests is like a shock that one is alive. Like at the end of like being like with Black people specifically who are in these protests, being in jail and then getting to come home and like a surprise that they are alive. And protest should not be that. Protest, like you should be able to go out and peacefully protest and not have to fear that you're not going to come home at the end of it, or not have to fear that in between being arrested and going home that you are going to be, you know, assaulted, tortured, traumatized, and all of these things. Like it should be that I can go get arrested for a cause and know that I'm coming home and things should not be happening to me in the middle. So that video has really pissed me off, but even we're seeing it in Atlanta, and this is partially a different conversation, but like the idea that that's a city that is majority Black, is one of the I want to say it's the second largest concentration of Black wealth. PG County, Maryland, near where I am, is the largest concentration of Black wealth. And yet we are still seeing police brutality. We are still seeing excess police forces. And so it doesn't mean, like you were saying, you might not be racist, your family might not be racist, but your city might still be. The systems that support and surround you and other people in your city still might be racist. And so I think it's important that you talk about the West Coast, because for me, I'm from the East Coast. I've been to the West Coast once. I was 19 the first time I went to the West Coast, so like almost an adult. And, you know, for us over here, a lot of it is we don't see, it is like you said, the white liberal that we should be concerned about. We don't see the West, like we don't see racism the same way. At least on the East Coast, I feel like it's more apparent on the East Coast, and it's very apparent in the South. But on the West Coast, there's this, you know, the California dream. It's very like alluring and it's beautiful. And yes, for people like me who, you know, grew up in hip hop culture, I remember, you know, I know what the crack epidemic did to LA. I remember I have an obsession with the OJ Simpson case. Like I know that racism and police and bad policing exist in LA, but it doesn't seem the same on the West Coast as it is on the East Coast. Until you're, like you said, the Seattle, that's a baby. Like I'm sorry, anybody under 18 is a baby. Like that's just a baby to me. Like you're 10 and you're being maced by the police. And so kind of getting back into our conversation, I want to talk about, because you rolled your eyes when I said it, but the idea of, you know, peaceful and non-peaceful protesting. And I want to specifically on this, the second day of Pride, I want to get into your thoughts about gay, I don't want to do that. The LGBTQ members of the community who, do I want to be shady?
No, you can say gay because in my,
I want to be inclusive because I've in my personal experience.
Here's why you can say gay. Here's why I think it's okay to just say gay people, because queerness is intersectional, and queerness, if you are queer, you are anti-racist.
Okay.
It is impossible to be queer and to claim that label and not be anti-racist. And if I see you doing it, I will. I'm going to fight you, because our queer history, the history of that word and that movement, is founded in a riot.
Yes.
In an anti-police riot, not just a break windows riot, but a punch cops riot. Okay, that's how the Stonewall riot started, when a black butch lesbian punched a cop in the face. And that is your history. And that's what we need to be uplifting right now. If you want to celebrate Pride, I honestly don't want to see any Pride posts that don't involve the amplification of what's happening right now. Because that is honoring Pride, that is celebrating Pride. And so, yeah, and I have no patience for white gays. I have no patience for performative allyship on the part of white gays. Because you're not queer, and I'm not counting you as part of my community. I'm not. I don't count racists as part of my community.
Yes.
I mean, they're in the gay community, but they're not. Right. I'm physically calling them out, and I'm saying, when you're ready. I mean, I sound like a teacher, but like when you're ready to act right, you can come inside.
Then you can come back to the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's.
But I think that's important, because and I'll be honest, and the reason I was going with the full acronym is like we'll talk offline about what I was about to say in my head. But like, so I didn't realize where the distinction of queer as an identity was coming from. Like I didn't understand that full technical term. So I'm glad, and I do appreciate you for saying that. Because I think there is a clear difference. And I think, because I mean, in the same way that we can talk about LGBTQ folks who are saying, you know, or like we just said, queer folks. I just backed myself into it. I said everything backwards. In the same way we were just talking about gay people who don't know their history, who are shocked and appalled at riots. We can also say the same thing for anybody who has anything to say about riots and rebellions. The idea that we celebrate July 4th, Independence Day. The Boston Tea Party was a riot, honey. They wasn't sitting there dressed up real cute, wearing, you know, white lace gloves and hello everyone.
They were destroying property.
They were literally pouring tea in the river. So much of this country and this country's history was riots. In the same way that I also, for people, and we can sort of talk about this, but like voting is dope. I won't discredit voting, but I
Mhm.
also note that civil rights happened because of the protest and voting.
Right.
Right. In the time when like Black people couldn't even vote, so it was really the protest caused people in Congress and in positions of power to vote differently.
Mhm.
And so I think that we always have to recognize that, which is why I wanted to start the conversation here, of that like protest is a part of what makes change, and it is a very important and an important part of the process, but it's not the only part of the process. The second part of the process is organizing. It is voting. It's what we do afterwards, and it's what we do while we're also protesting, which is where I really want to kind of center this conversation, is the idea of what people can be doing beyond going on the front lines. Because I acknowledge, for very many reasons, people cannot be on the front lines. Right now, anybody who knows me knows during Not Again SU in the fall, I was nowhere to be found but the Barnes Center. I don't think there were people who didn't even see me in the drama department building for days and weeks at a time. Like, I was really on the front lines doing that work, pulling 20 and 23 hours days just to do that organizing, that work. But on the other side, right now, I cannot be out there, right? Like, my father is in his 60s. I am not trying to risk COVID any more than I need to as a Black woman. For Black people in general who are out there on the front lines, I support you, I salute you, I commend you, because we also know that the risk of COVID and the mortality rates for Black folks with COVID is not great.
No.
And that for all those people who are on the front lines, who are doing the very necessary work, are really putting themselves at risk in more ways than one. I continue to be appalled at the fact that in a national pandemic, a global pandemic rather, that is affecting people's respiratory systems, the police are tear gassing non-violent protesters, the majority of whom are Black, who we know, if they catch COVID, if they become sick for other reasons, because we don't know what the chemicals in tear gas really are and what their effects are on the body, will not receive the health care that is needed in order to get through it. So I commend and applaud those people, but I also know that we have to have conversations about what resistance and oh yeah, that is true. It is also considered a war crime. That is also true. I learned that yesterday.
Specifically against medics. Do I think we should just draw the line on what's a war crime? No. But we can't draw the line at what's a war crime. We need to think about human rights outside of the law, because the law does not protect marginalized people. But the fact that they shouldn't be allowed to use war crimes against their own citizens, but we need to call special attention to the fact that medics are being tear gassed and shot at, which is a particular offense, a provable particular offense against the Geneva Convention that can be enforced globally. Like, the United States can be held accountable for that, and I think that's an important piece of information that needs to get out.
That needs to be put out, and I think also, like, even in that being another line of being a medic is a way to be an ally. I just want to throw that out there as a thing that I've seen. I don't know too much about the young person named Halsey. I don't listen to their music. So I don't know too much about them. They might be problematic in other places and spaces. But Auntie Galen does not know about that. But I've been noticing that the way that and I don't know their pronouns, which is why I'm saying they, because I thought I had seen something about their pronouns not being she, her, but I'm not sure.
I don't remember.
I noticed that they were out in the streets. And the thing is, being in the streets and raising signs and being in what's the word?
Being a human barrier, like being a human shield, like,
thank you.
That's
yes.
great. But like, we also need people in the back if people get tear gassed to take care of that stuff. So
and doing that and that medic work, or in DC last night, there were a group of protesters who were effectively trapped, similarly to how the Not Again SU protesters were during February. No tea, no shade. Let me be quiet. I'm applying to grad school. Let me calm down. But who were effectively trapped by the police shortly after the curfew, and were not allowed to leave. People were literally the majority of the people there were actually trying to get home, and were held pretty much overnight. And there was a man who opened his house to about 70 protesters to free them, or not free them, but essentially to give them protection and permission. I know that there was a house that was tear gassed that had protesters in it. But the idea that like opening your house is another way to be an ally, is another way to support the direct action of what's going on.
Yeah, if you live in a direct, what I've been saying is like if you have a risk of COVID in your house and you live in an affected city, and you know people are using pepper spray and tear gas, one thing you can do is if you have a backyard or a front yard, set up a tent and set up like a hose and like allow people to rest in your yard, like in your, like if you can't let them in the house, if you can let them in the house to shower, that's great, but like, you know, make your house a safe zone. A lot of my friends who are immunocompromised, a lot of my friends who have that are not neurotypical and who have autism and cannot, it's a liability for them to be like out. And by liability I mean like if like they're like it is a liability for them and for other people if they were to fall or, you know, like that kind of thing. They're opening their houses and making their houses safe zones. And all these things are direct action, right? Like all of these things are part of that and making sure people are taken care of, you know. I think I'm totally cool moving on. I'm sorry, moving on to like
but whatever
non-direct action ways. But let me just check my notes.
Yeah, no, make sure you say, make sure I've asked you to be here for a reason, so please make sure that we are addressing you know what you want to address.
I mean, like get Marshall trained. Like you mentioned this on your story earlier. Like
yes,
and I told you like send people to me. Like if you want training, I will lead a Zoom training. Anyone in the drama department, like I will lead a Zoom training for like protest marshals and like because like there's a lot of details that I can like I don't want to get into about like exactly how to use your privilege, but like
can you give like a general like a redacted definition of what that is?
Putting your body between police and Black people, and being on the outside, and is also it's a lot of things not to do in protests. I don't want to see white people leading chants. You need to amplify Black voices, and I want you to chant back, but don't lead. And like when we say like put yourself in the front lines, that doesn't mean amplify your voice. It means literally put your body between. Right. So like finding that distinction and finding how to do that well is like the number one thing. But I will absolutely lead a Marshall training. I will schedule it. Like if this needs to happen, it needs to happen. But yeah, I think that's all the short tidbit things on direct action. But there's like, but I want to especially highlight in the time of COVID, the things you can be doing if you cannot leave. You know, I think this protest would look different in a lot of ways 3 months ago.
Yes, definitely.
I don't think it would like. I think it would be over by now because people would have to go back to work.
You're right.
And like that's the thing about capitalism and how like COVID disrupting capitalism changed the landscape of this and made this possible is like, yes, it makes it more dangerous for us, but it also makes it like actually possible for people to go out day after day, 6 days in Atlanta to like do this, you know? And so.
And also noting that like, it should make that difficult in the sense of like, if you go out, and that's the reason why you want to have friends and have lots of people who go out and support it. Like you really probably should be self-quarantining if you went out on day 1, and we shouldn't see you again until day 15 if we get to day 15. And noting that, of course, like I say that from somebody who's been sitting in the house. So I know that makes it's a removed position for where I can say that, where I have the luxury, quote unquote, of saying that, or the emotional distance to say it. Right. But making sure that we can't advocate for Black lives and not also be careful to protect the Black lives that we still have. And I mean that as Black folk, I mean that as non-Black folk, I mean that as allies to the movement and people directly targeted in the movement. I think we have to make sure that we are prioritizing the collective health and safety of the Black community. So that means that this is a time. I love Rihanna Fenty said this when she got some award, I think at the NAACP or something, when she was like, tell your white friends to pull up. Like, this is the time for your white friends to pull up. We said that a lot during Not Again SU of like, this is the time to show. And I want to get into this because you and I have had some thoughts and some comments. Performative allyship.
Yeah,
right.
Let's talk about performative allyship. Can we talk about the freaking blackout today? Can we
these
start
blackout
there?
tiles and this. I'm not here. Oh my! Wow! I've done so much. Like, what do you? I
want to talk about how like performative allyship is always bad, but the blackout specifically is actually dangerous in this situation. When social media is our only true area of information, posting a blackout tile is taking up, even if you have a private account and only your followers see it, and it's not fucking up the algorithm. Like, it is taking feed space, literal space. You're taking up space. White people, you're taking up space. That's performative allyship, is white people taking up space.
To show that, like, because my issue with the blackout, so I had been hearing about the blackout maybe since last Thursday. Some people in the Black community about to cancel me for this, but I was following a young Ebro from Ebro in the Morning on Hot 97, and he had posted about the idea that on Tuesday he was not going to do his radio show, and he was only going to rebroadcast interviews specific to Black Lives Matter and Black liberation. So I heard about that on Thursday, didn't really see anything else about it. And then an Instagram page popped up yesterday that said the show must be paused. And I'm like, okay, boom, let me follow this, because I've kind of been hearing about this movement. I'm interested to see what the action plans and logistics are. It's 12:01 this morning, and I still have yet to see a legitimate plan of action. I have yet to see any information detailing what we are supposed to be doing, how we are supposed to be doing it, and what the purpose is. Which means that even if this was a well-intentioned movement, which I don't know because we really don't even know who created it, but even if it was a well-intentioned movement, it has now been co-opted into everything else. I was talking to my dad about this morning. I have seen as many interpretations of what we are supposed to be doing today as I have seen post. And that's when, to me, it is a badly organized mess. Because I think the idea of having a blackout is not a bad idea, but I think it's why and how are we doing it. So what I loved about, although we're in the process of canceling TikTok had a blackout day maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago or something.
On the 19th.
Okay, so on the 19th.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that and thinking about how, like, that blackout, part of it was following Black creators and liking their content, which means that when George Floyd died and Black creators started posting about that and posting about police brutality, that it got boosted on TikTok because people had spent an entire couple days prior to that following Black creators, which is why I think people should spend their time today on Instagram following Black creators, because you have in this age of social media where it's so easy to follow people, you have no excuse of having a mostly white Instagram feed.
There's none. And I say that, and the crazy part about it is, like, we talk about, like, I have always been in predominantly white schools. I've literally never attended a non-private institution, to include private Syracuse University. Like, never been to a non-private school. So the majority of people that I was in school with were white. And yet and still, I do not have a majority. Like, I think what you're following on social media and how you are using social media is more important than us just not using our voices. Like you were saying, the information about protest, about bail funds, about allyship is the conversation we're having now, about that are relevant to the direct safety of people, Black and non-Black, who are out protesting, is coming through social media. I've been doing this thing where I have been watching Don Travius Lemon. I call him Don Travius when he has his afro because he feels real Black to me, so I call him Don Travius. But I've been watching Don Travius Lemon for the past few days, and his Black Power Hour, as I like to call it. Well, like, Black Power Hour I stole from Feminista Jones on Twitter, who is, if you're not following Feminista Jones on Twitter, you are missing out. Just like as far as like Black radical feminism, activism, Black gun ownership, which I am learning a lot about because I was not a fan of it, but I'm learning a lot from her. Please go follow at Feminista Jones on Twitter. And don't blow up her mentions being stupid. Don't do that. But I've been watching him a lot, and it's like, as much as Don Lemon since Ferguson has learned how to be a Black person in a position of power and use that time to elevate Black voices and Black movements, even yet and still the reporting on CNN isn't great, right? We're seeing a lot of either vilification of the protesters or vague reporting on how they're the victims. And right, that's not useful and helpful, which is why social media is so important right now with everything that's going on. And for me, this blackout, like I said, badly organized, thrown together, and no intention. If we were doing, and the other part of the TikTok blackout that was important to mention is that it was specifically saying white or non-Black creators are to be silent today and only follow and comment and interact with Black content. If we're going to do a blackout, and I think that's what the intention might have been, but since the creators of the movement didn't do a great job of organizing and publicizing that, it got lost, and I didn't know that was the purpose until maybe 1 o'clock, Eastern time over here, is that if we were saying that we wanted non-Black people to be silent, to not post, and to only engage and support and amplify Black voices, then that would have been an effective movement. But when when it seems vague and all of a sudden I'm just seeing Black tiles, I'm like, okay, is Instagram broken? Did y'all get hacked? Was somebody kidnapped? What's going on? We're not seeing anything that's direct actionable. And then on top of that, I'm seeing a whole lot of white folk specifically posting these Black tiles. But when my Black body was sitting in the Barn Center getting harassed, threatened, when Not Again SU organizers were getting death threats in our DMs and being followed home, where were y'all then? But now y'all got a Black tile, so good job.
You're
That's
good.
activism for the day. Like, I'm not seeing it. It's at best. I was talking to one of my good friends from SU, and we were talking about it. We're like, at best, it's performative. But if we're gonna do it, how do we make it as best as we can? So like, if you're gonna not post and post this Black square, but you're gonna remind people to vote, you're going to amplify bail funds or direct action items and resources and donate and do those things, then I'm less annoyed. But don't do the Black square. I think the Black square is performative.
A Black square is really not a blackout. That's a whiteout. Because I'm seeing more white people post Black tiles than I did white people post resources the day before, right?
I'm seeing a lot of people posting who have really not done anything. And I don't want to negate that people might be doing work offline, because I think part of not being performative is not having to post everything to social media. But like, if I have seen you post not a single resource, not a single, I've never seen you use any of the hashtags before in anything. I've never seen you engaging with Black people to discuss their needs and what they want and ways they can best be supported. But I'm seeing you post this Black square. Please, please, please do not come into my DMs to ask me how I'm doing. And the thing is about that is I appreciate it. I appreciate there have been, people, white folk in my life who have reached out to me over the past couple of days. They are also the white people in my life who I have actual relationships with. So it makes sense. But if you're just doing it in the same way, if you're just posting this Black tile to show that you support the Black community, please don't pull up in any Black person's DMs so you can show that you matter. I saw this thing, somebody posted it on Twitter, where this person DM'd this girl and was like, hey, can I post this picture of us from childhood to caption racism is taught, not born, or something like that was supposed to be the caption. And the girl who was the recipient of this message was like, I ain't talked to you in 15 years, sis. Like, let's not be performative.
If you have to go back 15 years for a photo of you with a Black person, you're not doing enough.
And let's not be performative. Like, I have recently received my Bachelor in Fine Arts in acting, so I know a performance when I see it. Trust and believe. I can see it. I can read it. I'm, thinking about getting my master's in television, radio, film. So like, really, like, I read, I watch, I look, I can tell a story when I'm seeing it. Let's not be performative. Let's not engage in allyship that seeks to be praised, to be viewed, to be commented on, to be held up as, look at me, I'm doing. Because like I'm saying, the real allies who really do this work and really pull up, they just as tired as us. They out here doing the work in real ways. Eli, I don't think you understand. I talk about you a lot when I talk about like model allies. I'm gonna do this 89 times, I know it. But I'm just like, Eli doesn't be out here for the photo ops. Eli uses their social media in order to uplift and highlight and sort of boost signals. But I don't be seeing Eli just, let me post a black tile so everyone knows I'm for the blacks. Like,
you won't see it. You won't see it from me. I also want to say, like, I'm honestly getting disenfranchised even with the word ally because it's so empty now. Allies, the difference between for me is like an ally is someone who is with you until they have something to lose. I want to see more white accomplices who are willing to give up their privilege. Like, I want to see more of that.
And what is that?
Like, I want to see, like, because you my thing is that when you take the step over the line from I'm not racist to I'm anti-racist, when you take the step over that line, you will never unsee racism again. And that is something that people of color, specifically Black people, have had that knowledge their whole lives. Their eyes are always open, and you actually have to wake up. And you actually, it feels like you're losing something. It feels like you're losing something because you've had the privilege of not seeing it for so long. And a lot of people are getting radicalized by the fact that their eyes are being opened to what police brutality looks like and what anti-Blackness looks like. So it's going to feel really uncomfortable. And I'm like preparing white people right now. It's going to feel super uncomfortable to see racism for the first time. Like to see what like the actual reality is for the first time, and like get ready to sit in that discomfort because it is nowhere near what Black people experience every single gosh darn day of their lives. Right. So like,
you can curse if you need to. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
I don't like, I'm giving people that, like white people that right now. It's like, it's going to hurt. Like you have to be willing to feel that. Like, do I want your Black friends to see your tears? No, I don't. They don't have time. They don't have energy for your.
You were like, that's good. We're going with that.
Like, I mean, I saw a post earlier today that was like, empaths, how y'all doing? And I literally commented, I was like, all these white people. I was like, I mean, I'm crying a lot, but like I'm doing it in private because Black people don't need to see my sadness because they're grieving on their own right now. And it's time, like it's time for us to stop, like white people to stop acting like our feelings in general about how Black people protest and like all of it, that it matters. Like, I mean, that goes back to the nonviolence thing. Like, I'm not going to call anyone out right now, but like smashing windows, I don't give a fuck about it. I don't. Because a Black life matters more than 100 buildings on fire. I don't care.
And also, like you were in kind of what you were saying, I just want to interject it and then please continue your thought of like, if you are not Black, it is not your space, your place, or your job to critique Black protest. It's just not. Your job, and I hate to sound like the Twitter young people, but like your job is simply to open your purse. Your job is simply to put your body in between the baton. Your job is simply to go to the jail and go drive Black protesters home. That, like, I have absolutely no patience for the conversations I am seeing about, oh, it's a broken building, and oh, my da-da-da-da-da. Like, a man, George Floyd, a woman, Breonna Taylor, a trans person, Tony McDade, were murdered. I said this last year when the When They See Us documentary came out. Or not documentary, but the bio series came out. those men lost between 11 and 16 years of their lives. I don't care that the city awarded them 43 point some odd million dollars. No amount of money gives them back that time. I've had the pleasure of meeting Kevin Richardson this year, and he wanted to go to Syracuse, and I'm a Black kid at Syracuse, and having the pleasure to meet him and seeing the gratitude with which he moved through that space because we invited him to campus, and that we just wanted to give him things because we felt like he was a part of our family. I was there at the conversation because I am an Our Time Has Come scholar, well, alumna of that program now. And when we announced that there was going to be a scholarship in his name, I have never seen, in all of my years of watching award shows, people win things of my life, I've never seen somebody more grateful for a scholarship being named after them than anything else on this planet. And so it's like, for me, money doesn't change the fact that these people, they're not coming back. I don't care how much money you give their family. I don't care about any of that because they are not going to come back from the graves. They're just not. These buildings, people have insurance. People have GoFundMes. I have seen Black businesses destroyed in all of this, mostly by white people wanting to live out their anarchist dreams and dressing up as the Joker and all that bullshit. Excuse my language. But like, the money will come. Those buildings can be replaced. I saw a business owner, Heather Sanders. She's like in LA. She was like at one point friends with Black China, and she's one of those girls. But she has a boutique that was destroyed in LA, and she posted the pictures of all of it, right? And at the end, her last slide of the thing was, "And I still love being Black," right? Like, her business is going to be fine. I have seen, in DC with Founding Farmers, the owner did a Twitter thread that I've retweeted, and he was just like, would I prefer that my building not be busted? No. But if that's what it takes for Black lives to matter and for Black voices to be heard, I have insurance. It'll be fine. So it's like, for me, I'm not seeing a legitimate argument as to this conversation. Like, this conversation it's asinine to me, quite frankly. And I understand for certain people, especially small business owners, like, that is your hard work that has gone into this.
Right.
Your life has been poured into it. The same way that George Floyd's mama poured her life into raising him. Right? Like, these are people who are dying, who are unarmed, who are simply living their lives in ways that other people can do, specifically white people can do. Right. And ain't nothing gonna happen to them. Ain't nobody finna touch them. But the idea that rioting or breaking buildings is more important than someone's literal actual life, like, I want people to understand, and that's why I'm having this conversation now, because I wanted to have this conversation as a means of education, right? Like, people are always asking, how can I be better? How can I do better? This is a space. I'm having that conversation. I am doing the work so that way other Black people don't have to, because since I am sitting in the house, this is the way that I am choosing to engage. Choosing to engage, I want to highlight that, because it's no Black person's responsibility to educate you on how to be anti-racist. It's just not. Too much work has been done. This is yet another video on the subject. There are books, there are movies, there are television shows, which I will be highlighting at the end of this conversation to give people resources. But I'm choosing to do this engagement so I don't have to have these conversations anymore, because buildings get replaced. Buildings will come back.
And also, like, they also don't matter even if they didn't, because, like, it's a capitalist lie to say, like, buildings matter in general. Like, they're just material. Like, they're just space. And, like, focusing on that is such, it's a, like, not to overuse the word, but it's a privilege to be focused on that. It's a privilege to have any, like, emotional labor left to care. Right? Like, yes. And you don't have, white people and non-Black people do not have the right or to tell, I'm sorry, my brain, like, I'm just,
no, you're good.
Mad
I felt it. I felt it. I was like, ooh, Eli got mad.
Like, to tell Black people how not to be angry after 400 years of this country, absolutely. abusing them in order to build those buildings. Like, Black people built this country on stolen indigenous land.
On stolen indigenous land.
And to say, like, that they don't have the right to tear down the shit that they built is such a disrespectful and asinine thing to focus on. And I also want to highlight, when we're talking, like, just for a second, to talk about indigenous, like, it's a totally separate, like, Black and indigenous solidarity, but, like, it is not an accident. Like, it's not a coincidence that the officer who killed George Floyd was acquitted less than 5 years ago of murdering an indigenous man. It is not a coincidence. Those oppressions are tied. And I do want to say about, like, overlapping oppressions and intersectionality, specifically like queerness, is like, you can say, like, our oppressions are tied and not decenter the conversation, right? So, like, it's important to say, like, our oppressions are tied, and, like, and I think we should, I think saying there's two sides to the phrase, like, there's no freedom until we're all free. Like, yes, that's true, but you shouldn't be fighting for Black people because of what their freedom does for you. Like, you cannot be doing that. Like, queer people,
I've always hated that phrase, because I feel like, and a phrase that people have heard me use a lot in space, is that when we look at any space, academic spaces, theater, entertainment industry, bloop, all these other spaces, is that as we liberate the Black woman in a space, everybody else is inherently becoming freer, right? And this thing of, and I like that phrase a little bit better, because I don't like the idea that, like, I'm going to fight for you to be free because that makes me free. Like, right. I think it's important to center who the most marginalized voices in a conversation are. And yes, in general society, the argument can be that the Black woman is the most oppressed woman in American society. But I would also argue, to further complicate it, that the Black trans woman is the most marginalized voice in society. And as a cisgendered woman, like, that's my place to complicate that argument. Because
it's not a coincidence that Marsha P. Johnson was a Black trans sex worker, bisexual. Like, it's not a coincidence that she led the
not at all
queer liberation movement, because, like, that is a movement that got shit done because it centered the most oppressed, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's totally okay to relate, like, especially for non-Black people of color and for queer white people, to say, like, I relate to your, like, I have an experience with, like, because I have experience with police, right? Like,
right.
Specifically as an assault victim, like, I have experience with police that are not positive, but I'm not centering that shit right now. I'm using it to inform me. I'm using it as a way to, like, get it, like, to get myself in and get that education, but I'm not centering that shit. I'm not talking about general bad police experience right now. I'm talking about anti-Black police brutality, because that is the issue at hand right now. We need to call in those other conversations as we go, but, like, that cannot be the central thread right now. It can't be.
And I think it's important, like, you and I having both, you're still there. I just graduated from the same drama program, but, like, we talk a lot about the idea of, like, finding your in, right? Because, like, when we think about stories and characters, like, for me, I have played characters where I'm like, the only thing we have in common is that we're women, right? But, like, that, you have to find your way into empathizing with other people. And so I don't have an issue with queer folks relating the Stonewall riots with what's going on right now. I have no issue with you relating, because that is the way through which you will understand and see how your experience and my experience are similar, but they are not the same. It's not the time for us to say
they are tied, but they are not the same. They are, like,
and it's also important to do that in a way that honors both experiences. Because I also think it's important that when I say Black Lives Matter, I mean all Black lives. Because anybody, and this is a side note bar to the conversation for people who probably aren't even present, because it's not how I frame the conversation, but the idea that, like, for Black people, if we are only fighting for cisgendered Black people, then we actually just want power, not liberation. And so I think that that is an important, as we move throughout all of our identities, is, are we, as we are asking for liberation and fighting for liberation, are we doing so in a way that promotes equality and not oppression?
Right.
Which I think is just really important, because and I think part of that comes from ignorance of, we can only be I don't want to say a master of, but like, we can only be an expert on our own experiences. Like, I know what my experience as Galen, a Black woman, has been. I don't know the experience for all Black women, but I know what my experience has been, and can therefore empathize and more easily be able to engage with other women. There are women who are darker than me who have a very different experience than I am. There are women that are lighter than me that have a very different experience than them because of our proximities to whiteness. But as a Black woman, there are certain struggles we are just going to have. So I can understand them. So when people and allies come into the conversation, I want people to go, how does this mirror me or my history or my story? But I think, and like you're saying, it's about not centering oneself. I had a question for you. Jesus, the offense.
I want to say a little like about proximity to whiteness, and about understanding like touching back on like Black elitism and Black wealth too. Like, in the same way that like white people don't just get to say I have a Black friend when they get called racist, you don't get to say, well, a Black person told me like this, like a Black celebrity told me this, so it's okay. Like, there are multiple Black celebrities coming out right now, with chiefs of police, and are saying like no violence, like Killer Mike and like all these other celebrities that are coming out.
I just want to pause it right there, because this is where I got angry. Black celebrities are not the authorities on the Black identity, the Black experience, or the Black culture. They are representatives of, in the same way, as many shades of Black people as there are that many more experiences in Blackness. Killer Mike, which your name is Killer Mike, and you want to be out here simping for the police, I don't comprehend it. You're T.I. and you're King of the South, and you've been out here and arrested 80 million times, but you're simping for the police. I don't get it. I need white people to be critical thinkers and critical consumers. There are Black people who, because of their proximity to whiteness, their proximity to wealth, their how entrenched in capitalism they are because of their experiences, who are not saying accurate things. Killer Mike is, oh goodness, all right, we're going to have to start another one in a second because it's about to go out. Everybody,
come back with us, everybody.
Yeah, everybody, we're going to take a quick break on my rant. We're going to go ahead and end this live, and I'm going to restart it again in about a minute. Smitty speaking.